Hello, everybody, and welcome to another installment of the Sunday service with the Atheist Reformation. Joining me once again is Harry. How are you doing?
Doing all right. Trying to stay busy, not succeeding.
Well, that's why we do the show every week. A little bit of busy work here and there. So, let's see. We are on episode 22 now. We've been doing this for 22 weeks now, oddly enough.
We have more episodes than most series at Fox.
This is very true. This is very true.
We're
Yeah,
almost
because
to five.
yeah. And also, we are at 77 subscribers as of today, so thank you to all those who have tuned in, subscribed, and enjoyed the show. Hopefully, y'all continue to do so as time goes on. Today is going to be a little bit different than other days. Normally, we have a couple of heavier stories mixed in with some lighthearted stuff. But unfortunately, today, most everything we've got is a bit on the heavier side. Some of it lighter than others. One of them pretty bad.
Yeah.
And so if you don't want to experience that, don't want to deal with that this week, then I understand if you choose to watch something else entirely this week. However, there will be a point towards the end to kind of break everything up where we look at a fourth article that's taken from BreakPoint.org and kind of address some nebulous and pointless arguments that they try to make against atheism here and there. So that one is just kind of an intellectual breakout from the rest of the news this week, which really isn't all that good.
Yeah.
So let's go ahead and get the worst of the worst out of the way. And we're going to talk about a story that I've entitled, and this is not to be snarky or anything, this is to basically break this down to its essence as to what it is. And that is faith-driven filicide. For anybody who does not know what filicide is, that is to murder one's child. And we're going to talk about today of poor Romina Ashrafi. She was the victim of an honor killing. She's 13 years old. For someone like me, that hits a little bit close because I have a daughter who's not much younger than her. So, yeah. Anyways.
There's so much really bad stuff in this story. The further layers you dig into it.
And that's what we're going to do today. We're going to dig into it some, and we're going to see where it goes. So, if you're ready for it, let's go. So, the murder of Romina Ashrafi, a 13-year-old girl, was killed by her father in Talesh City, that's in Iran, and has caused an uproar among Iranians on social media and human rights activists, as well as some political figures. She had run away from home due to threats and abuse from her father, and she was returned to her home by the authorities. The Vice President on Women's Affairs on Tuesday announced a special order to investigate the murder. According to the neighbors, Romina knew that if she returned home, her life would be in danger. She had warned the police and judicial authorities, and she was unwilling to go back, but the police returned her to her home anyways. She had fallen in love with a boy in the city. The father was arrested for honor killing, and the investigations into her murder are ongoing. Some political activists have criticized the judiciary for rejecting the bill to protect women and have demanded the death sentence for the father. According to Sharia law, only the blood owners, the immediate family members, are allowed to demand execution for the murder of their loved one. Therefore, most honor killings go unpunished or with little punishment, since the family will not demand the death sentence for another family member. So, that's the whole story in a nutshell. That's what happened to this poor little girl. And, quite frankly, her dad's a piece of shit.
Well, yeah, that goes without saying. But it's important to say it.
Yes, it is. He's a piece of shit. The Iranian government, for not passing a bill to protect young women from things like this, those who voted against it, or I'll even say those who abstained from voting, they are also gigantic pieces of shit.
Now, it is worth noting that the Iranian people, social media, and media are covering the story to bring attention to it.
Yes.
So this is saying that, we're not.
No, well, I'm not saying Iran as a whole is a piece of shit. I'm saying that those in the government that have voted against any measure of protecting young women from barbaric aspects of their governing faith, I can't stand that crap. That kind of shit pisses me off. So yeah, no. And that's all this is. This is murder justified by religion.
Yeah. So to go into a little more details from some of the other articles that we're not going to go through, because there's a lot of redundancy in them.
Mm-hmm.
One of the other articles mentions that the quote unquote boy that she fell in love with was actually a 35-year-old man. So for those of you who have a background in criminology and understand a little bit about when people are victimized, everything about the story really goes along with that she was probably a victim of ongoing abuse at her father's hand.
Yes.
Some of the stories didn't really even portray that they were in a relationship, like an authentic relationship. It almost made it seem like this was just an adult that she could talk to because the police weren't listening to her.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't know what the relationship between them really is. 2 out of 3 sources say that they were somehow romantically involved, which between a 13-year-old and a 35-year-old, that's not okay either.
No, it's not, but unfortunately is not entirely uncommon in the Islamic world.
In certain other countries, that is something that might be a cultural norm there that is definitely not here in the West.
No, it is definitely not.
So we're looking at probably a situation where she ran away in order to escape it, and the police, either because they know the father or because of whatever reason, refused to believe her and returned her right back into the household that was victimizing her.
Well, this is also a country where, because of the predominant religion there, treats women as second-class citizens. In fact, sometimes not even really as true citizens at all. Because they do not carry with them the same rights that men have in their countries. And, for anybody who might criticize me about having some issues with how feminism is being used as a cudgel here in the United States, I highly encourage those people to start calling out against things that actually matter, such as things like this.
Well, to go a little bit further into the history, Iran was actually a fairly progressive country if you go back 30 or 40 years ago.
Right.
So it's not so much a symptom of the religion itself. It's a symptom of the theocracy using the religion in order to control people.
True.
And that's whenever there was a regime in Iran.
But they base the stuff off the tenets of the religion. I mean, okay, Christianity was used for some very terrible things for several centuries, better part of 1,000 years. Islam has been used for that same purpose for at least as long. So yeah, no, I'm in situations like this. I become a little anti-religious entirely. I'm not opposed to a person believing what they want. However, I am very much opposed to barbaric belief systems. This is one of them.
So when we're looking at this, the big thing that I have I guess it just kind of baffles me from a legal standpoint is how someone could murder someone, and as long as you call it an honor killing,
you effectively get off scot-free.
I'm sorry?
You effectively get off scot-free.
Right. Well, yeah, more or less. The state has no way to investigate. So if you're the only family member and you claim it's an honor killing, then there is no plaintiff. The state doesn't investigate the murder of this person. Instead, you have a situation where you have to have another family member who is willing to put themselves in a situation where they could then become accused, or they could be honor killed. They have to put themselves on the line to accuse you of it being wrong so that it can go to trial. And it's a whole way to basically more or less blame the victim for being murdered and protect the assailant.
Yeah, it really is. And it's to the point where it's now government sponsored to a degree.
Yeah.
In that, because of the laws they've passed, because of the regulations they've put in place and legislation that they've written, there's no legal recourse for a situation like this, not currently. And that's why bills like the one that would have completely done away with honor killings and gone to protect young women, even just in Iran, let alone the Middle East at large, where this is still a rampant problem. You know, aside from another family member stepping up who could, at any point in time, be called out and accused by any other family member who would rather protect the first person over the other person. It's a way to essentially bully people into silence.
Yeah.
And pretend something that is very much going on is somehow either not going on, not that bad of a thing, or somehow not completely friggin' reprehensible.
And it's interesting you use the word state-sponsored. In this case, literally, when the victim escaped, the state delivered
her into the hands of her killer.
Yeah, back to the killer.
Yeah. I mean, this is even worse than some habits that some police departments had back in the mid-20th century of delivering victims of domestic abuse back to their abusers.
Yeah.
Because at least then, if something happened, if they ended up dead, sure, they'd investigate that. Doesn't help any at that point. Doesn't help her any, but, you know. Anyways.
Just a correlation to what we've seen in America, Jeffrey Dahmer. That's happened with, that was famously something that happened there. The victim escaped, said that he was going to get killed, and the police returned him back.
Yeah.
That was more inspired by homophobia than anything else, though.
True, but still, an issue's an issue.
Yeah.
All right, so I guess it's time to move on to our next story to avoid, because we've beaten this horse into the ground as verbally as much as we can, more to assuage possibly our desires to do the self-same to this young woman's dad.
Yeah.
Well, at this point, it's not even right to call him that. Over here, we call a person like that a sperm donor. So the next one we're going to talk about is Bill's bust. We're talking in particular about Bill de Blasio. And no, it has nothing to do with a marble statue of everything from the chest up.
Such a weird story.
It is kind of odd. This comes from the Washington Times, so not the Washington Post. So I will temper my judgment a little bit, considering Washington Times is staunchly conservative, so I'm going to try and decolorize this or depoliticize this however we can. So, Yeshiva school was, or an Orthodox Jewish school, was shut down by the NYPD. And it was defended by the current mayor of New York City, Bill de Blasio. He defended it, it says Tuesday, so that's May 19th, so that's a week and a half ago, roughly. defended his crackdown on an underground yeshiva, saying it was absolutely unacceptable, that's a direct quote apparently, for the Orthodox Jewish school to violate the city's pandemic order against large gatherings. He says it is absolutely unacceptable what the folks at this yeshiva did. And he said that on a morning news station. He said they had been warned, and everybody had been warned a great many times. At the same time, he said the Nitra Yeshiva in the Bedford Stuyvesant, I'm hoping I pronounced that correctly, neighborhood would not be issued a summons after being caught with about 70 people inside, saying that they obeyed a police order to disperse. He says that if the NYPD find any gathering, they're going to break it up, but the first goal is just for people to disperse and not come back. The summons is there for people who resist. So in this case, as I understand it, again, that's a quote from de Blasio, they immediately dispersed. He added, they will not be coming back, I assure you, and if we have to shut that building entirely, we will. This episode comes with the mayor's relationship with the Jewish community already tense after he broke up a funeral gathering for an Orthodox rabbi last month in Brooklyn, prompting accusations of selective enforcement. Earlier that day, large crowds had gathered for a Blue Angels flyover without any reaction from police, but de Blasio later warned the Jewish community and all communities that the time for warnings has passed. I'm not going to read the tweet from JT Lewis because I'm not entirely convinced that this is actually targeted, though it at least seems to have the color of it, but we're not sure. Another tweet of anti-Semitism accusations coming from a Georgetown law professor. Okay. Others asked the city's...
Least, like, even if it's not blatant, at the very least, it's incredibly unfortunate series of events, tone deafness on behalf of the mayor, and then an oddly just not remembering a sequence of events that would have led to why this would be interpreted that way.
Right. No, I can completely understand that. In fact, I'm actually kind of curious as to how they have not drawn the parallels on that, because this is going to probably get me in a little bit of trouble, but reading through this, which we're done with it at this point, reading through this, it, to me, has the same color of Stop and Frisk.
Yeah.
It started out as, okay, high crime areas were targeted specifically, but then it became hyper-specialized where law enforcement would only appear in those neighborhoods and not others at all. And on top of that, they would effectively stop and frisk anyone they saw in the neighborhood. And so, you know, you had your accusations of being brown shirts and things like that at that point. So this really does strike me as being very similar to Stop and Frisk.
Yeah. And I believe that with Stop and Frisk, it eventually escalated to the point where
they had to completely get rid of it at that point.
Well, I think there was a voice recording of someone giving a meeting where they were saying to racially profile who they were to stop and frisk. And that was like
it was, I believe, if I remember right, and I hope I'm not putting words in anyone's mouth on this one, but if I remember right, I think it was the mayor at the time after Rudy Giuliani.
Which would be Bloomberg.
I think it was Bloomberg.
Yeah.
And wait, isn't he governor of New York right now?
No, Bloomberg was running for president for about
that's right
30 minutes.
Yeah,
spring.
That's right.
He wanted to jump into the race.
I knew he had run for something recently, and I couldn't remember exactly what he had gone for. But yeah.
$500 million and then disappear. That's what he wanted to do. Something like that.
Something like that.
So, a little bit of background onto this de Blasio story that makes it all that much weirder is last year there were some reports of one specific yeshiva school where someone had graduated and was not happy with the education quality there. He said that he wasn't really prepared for college, and he was filing some lawsuits. Well, there were other complaints that of abuse from clergy and things along that nature about other schools, and there was an investigation going on. And there were reports that the mayor had requested state senators to postpone the reports until they got a vote allowing the city to have tighter control over these private parochial yeshiva schools, because the city wanted that control. Now, there's back and forth saying that the report just simply wasn't ready yet. There's people saying that de Blasio never said that, never wanted it. But the report came out right after the city got a tighter control over this religious group's private schooling. And that was really weird. And a lot of people noted that in December. And then fast forward a few months, and it's, the next step is it's almost like you're targeting, or it appears that the news story comes out that there's a rabbi's funeral. It's okay for the Blue Angels to fly over and have thousands of people outside, but then the rabbi can't have a funeral in a traditional setting. And then the very next week, you're going to shut down a school whenever you were kind of ignoring that, or appeared to be 6 months earlier. So,
yeah, that is a bit. It does have the ring of conspiracy to it, and I think that's something that people should follow closely if that is something near and dear to them or affects them in some way. I think they should pay attention to that and see how the story develops as time goes on. And we'll keep an eye on it too, here and there. And if there are any new interesting developments that are, of course, channel relevant, yeah, we'll bring it back up again, for sure. All right, so moving on to this next bit, we take a look at discrimination in Wisconsin. And because my twisted mind comes up with really horrendous analogies, the title of this story, we're just going to call Bad Cheese.
I feel like this is a story I wasn't aware of.
I sent it to you.
Okay.
This is the story of, coming to us from American Atheists, and the state of Wisconsin discriminates against an atheist couple who are seeking to marry. So, let's take a look at that.
I was expecting actual cheese and didn't realize this is the article you were leading into.
Pretty good, huh?
You caught me. You got me.
Yep. Anyways, was the cheddar a little sharp for you, Harry?
But
I know, right? Wisconsin is discriminating against non-religious couples by denying them the right to marry by mutual declaration, a privilege granted to religious believers. Last week, two national secular watchdog organizations, the Center for Inquiry and American Atheists, were contacted by a couple from Winnebago County who were refused permission to marry by mutual declaration because they were not religious. Wisconsin has a marriage celebrant law, which, if you follow the link in the description down below, you can click that right there, and it'll take you right to the relevant statute. Lists those who can legally solemnize marriages in the state by signing a wedding license and giving it legal effect. Other than religious officials and certain state officials, such as judges, the law permits solemnization by the two parties themselves by mutual declaration that they take each other as husband and wife in accordance with the customs, rules, and regulations of any religious society, denomination, or sect to which either of the parties may belong. Nonetheless, these two atheist individuals seeking to self-solemnize were denied this right by the office of the county clerk in Winnebago. The couple informed us that their request to solemnize their marriage by mutual declaration had been refused because they were not religious. Instead, county officials demanded they arrange for an officiant in order to proceed with their wedding plans. and that comes from the litigation counsel Jeffrey Blackwell at American Atheists. Had they been religious, or if they had lied and simply said they were religious, their marriage could have proceeded as planned. Instead, merely because they are atheists, an arbitrary and discriminatory hurdle was placed in their path that religious Wisconsinites don't face. Federal courts have ruled that excluding secular celebrants from solemnizing is unconstitutional under the First Amendment and the 14th Amendment's guarantee of equal protection. In 2014, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Seventh Circuit ruled in Center for Inquiry Incorporated versus the Marion Circuit County Clerk that CFI-trained secular celebrants must be permitted to solemnize marriages in Indiana. Since then, that same ruling has been extended by litigation to Illinois, and Michigan has recently acknowledged during litigation that its legislation already permitted secular celebrants. This is one of the most clear-cut cases of discrimination against atheists still sullying our legal system. This comes from Nick Little, who is CFI's general counsel and legal director. We fought this battle across the country and are willing to fight it here. We hope, though, that Winnebago County and Wisconsin's Attorney General realize this is a case they cannot win and allow non-religious Wisconsinites the same rights to the wedding of their choice that their religious neighbors have. And, of course, they sent a letter to the Winnebago County Clerk and the Wisconsin Attorney General. I'd say this is pretty cut and dry.
My question is this the law itself was discriminatory, or was this just like some like head in the sand clerk that decided to apply the law in the most ridiculous way possible? Because I'm having a hard time understanding where exactly the failure was here.
So it was let's see. It just says they were denied this right by the office of the county clerk in Winnebago. So somebody in the Winnebago County Clerk's office denied it.
Because I don't see how the law itself would have banned them. It just seems like there's a unilateral clerk that was like, I'm going to just mess you up.
Possibly, but when you read the law, when you read the quoted portion of the statute itself, it does make sense where it could be ruled discriminatory. It says, in accordance with the customs, rules, and regulation of any religious society, denomination, or sect to which either of the parties may belong. Atheism is not a religion.
Okay.
It's not a denomination. It's not a religious society, nor is it any kind of religious sect.
I guess with a literal definition, that's really poor wording.
Well, not only that, but you go a step further. By mutual declaration that they take each other as husband and wife could also be seen as possibly discriminatory towards same-sex couples.
Okay.
So this is something that I think could result in a fight on two fronts, neither of which are fronts that Wisconsin would ever win on.
Yeah.
Because we have federally recognized that same-sex marriage is entirely protected under the First Amendment, and it always was and didn't require a ruling to declare it so. That was an opinion handed down by the Supreme Court. And on top of that, freedom of religion also means you are allowed to be free from religion. So you should not have to submit to some sort of essentially a religious test to exercise a right that you have. If you don't have to submit to a religious test to hold public office, then why should you to get married? Whether it's with an officiant or not.
You do have to swear an oath, though, on... What's the rule on that? Whenever you, swear into office, you have to put your hand on a Bible to swear.
No, you don't have to put it on a Bible. Say, for instance, if I were to take public office, I'd swear on the Constitution.
Which would make technically more sense.
Yes, I believe it would make much more sense.
So has that happened in the past? Because I know that there's been members of other religious groups that have sworn on their
They've sworn on their religious texts, as far as I'm aware. But as far as anyone simply opting for swearing on the Constitution or anything like that, not that I'm aware of.
Yeah, honestly, if I was ever elected president do we have any viewers right now? Because I wonder how many of them are just like, that's not going to happen.
There's 2 viewers, and I'm pretty sure they both agree that it's never going to happen, Harry.
Okay, that makes me feel better about myself. But, I mean...
There were 4 earlier, and they would have all held the same opinion.
Good, so it's a consensus right there.
Exactly.
But as I'm a Christian, I wouldn't want to swear on the Bible for a political office. Like, that just doesn't seem right. Because in the Bible, it says you shouldn't be making oaths. So, like, I can be like, I will defend the Constitution, but I'm not going to, like, say, for this position on earth that is clearly not a religious thing, I'm going to drag God into this.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't sound right.
No. Well, and at the same time, I would inherently have a little bit of distrust for individuals that would swear on their religious text versus the Constitution. For the plain and simple fact that in the majority of religions, or at least the 3 big ones, the Abrahamic religions, it clearly says in those texts that your duty is to God first and everything else is after that.
Yeah.
So, let's see.
I also think it's interesting that there's like literally thousands of years, or at least 1,000 years of contradicting interpretations on the religious text. But if you swore on the Constitution, you really only got like a couple of 100 years of pretty clearly defined court interpretation that doesn't contradict, it overrides. So
Precisely.
There is a correct interpretation of the Constitution.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, no, I would say that swearing on the Constitution to uphold your constitutional oath is a far better thing to do than on any religious text. And, yeah.
And you heard that today from an atheist and an evangelical Baptist.
There you go. So, there's a little bit of reaching across believing lines. All right, so now we're going to get into the little bit deeper one today. This one comes to us from BreakPoint.org via the Chattanooga Times Free Press, saying that the new atheism is old news because it couldn't explain sin. We have some problems right off the bat, unfortunately. And because of this, I'm calling this particular story Broken Point.
In related news, Superman can't beat the Hulk because the Hulk isn't on Krypton.
True. But anyway, let's get into this one. In the early 2000s, across the digital and print world of Christian apologetics, the so-called New Atheism was a central topic of discussion. Authors like Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, and the late Christopher Hitchens generated quite an audience by attacking religion in general. Okay. Hitchens, yeah, he attacked religion. Sam Harris, no, he didn't attack religion. He showed it for what it was. Dawkins, yeah, he's kind of combative. Definitely.
I'm not going to lie. Every time you say Sam Harris, I keep thinking of Sam Hunt. Moving on.
Yeah, because I can't process that much idiocy all at once. And Christianity in particular, portraying both as irrational evil forces in society. Evil, I wouldn't go so far as saying that. Irrational, yes. Books like The God Delusion, God is Not Great, and The End of Faith argued that belief in God was unscientific and that unbelief would make us all better people. I mean, when you look at the studies, it kind of leans in that direction. I know that's uncomfortable for a lot of people, but it's kind of true. You may be thinking to yourself, I really haven't thought about those guys in a while. Exactly. The movement has grown strangely quiet over the last decade. No, it just moved to a different platform.
Well, there's a good reason why we hadn't heard of one of them in about a decade.
Yeah, it's called He's Dead.
And he was the most aggressive of them.
Yeah, he had the biggest public persona. Sam Harris approaches everything in a very clinical and scientific method. Richard Dawkins has pretty much gone back to focusing on evolutionary biology because he feels that he's answered all the questions that have been put forth by religious leaders. And I can kind of understand where he's coming from on that one, because he keeps getting the exact same questions over and over, despite having answered them a great many times.
It's so weird to think of the fact that Dawkins is responsible for all culture in the past decade because he created memes.
But anyways, like, people, I dislike the fact that a lot of Christians, particularly apologists and people who write for things like BreakPoint, almost like try to hide behind the religion at that point, or hide behind the fact that their ideas are being attacked. Because following a religion, that's an idea. Ideas either do have merit or don't have merit in their usefulness to society, usefulness to humanity, or whether or not they're actually accurate or true or correct, whatever word you want to use for it. And so there's nothing wrong with attacking an idea. Because if you want your idea to be the best, if you want your idea to show, if you want to show the world that your idea is better than any other, then it has to be ready to be attacked. It has to be ready to be attacked on all sides at all times, and subjected to the rigors of, effectively, peer review, open discussion, and debate. If it can't survive that, it doesn't deserve to move on.
I would disagree with you on that, but it's not that I'm saying you're wrong. I just have a different perspective on it, which is that religion and faith is not on the same level as an idea. An idea is a thought or something you understand to be true based on evidence.
I would counter that with arguing that, okay, you're going the route of religion and faith is very personal. Ideas are no less personal.
They can be personal, but I wouldn't say personal. I would say they're part of your identity. They are you.
Okay, so
your essence.
Okay, so explain to me how, say, the scientific body of work in physics attributed to Albert Einstein is somehow not his identity.
Well,
and yet all of those things had to be subjected to rigorous testing, rigorous debate, rigorous assault, until they were proven to be better than everything else.
So there are different kinds of people. There are people who are prepared to defend themselves and defend their identity, and then there are people who are just not. They are not capable of having an interaction that questions anything. I know we've run into these people who just are not capable of intelligent debate.
Yes.
Those people have ideas that they'll argue about that they're okay with. But you can't talk about anything meaningful with them without them taking it personally and shutting down.
Yeah, people like Darth Dawkins.
We still salty about that, or are we?
No. If anyone's salty, it would have to be him. It's just you brought that up. No, that interaction is something that happened on this channel. That is a very good example of this.
I'm salty he hid his identity. I wish he would have just come out and said who he was instead of playing games.
Yeah, hiding like that is a bit of a cowardly thing to do. Even if he had announced himself as Darth Dawkins, I still would have brought him on the show. And I still would have treated him the exact same way that he got treated because of how he behaved. Because all he did was scream and try to redefine words left and right in a way that made as little sense as possible.
Yeah.
And
I guess
our show's being watched by the Atheist Roundtable. I did say good evening to them earlier, and they've been vocal in the chat, so I'm going to bring them up a bit.
Oh, nice.
Okay, yes, I completely agree with this. I don't think there's anything wrong with attacking a religion. I do not think it's acceptable to attack the human. There is a difference. Yes, very much so. You are completely correct on that. Religion is an idea. Yeah, there you go. Because someone adopts an idea as their identity does not make it not an idea. Again, I find myself in agreement. So religion, at the end of the day, is still an idea. It may be a very particular kind of idea, but it's still an idea. And ideas are meant to be challenged. If you can't handle having your idea challenged, then don't try to argue based on that idea. Because it's going to do nothing but get your feelings hurt. And then, like in instances like this, it seems as though they're hiding behind it and treating it as a personal attack when it's not. It's like, okay, yes, Christianity in particular is being attacked. I wonder why. What country are we in?
So, those statements make the assumption that someone is capable of separating their religious identity or their ideas from themselves. And I know that this is unfortunate, but I'm appealing to people who are incapable of that level of intellectual discourse where they can separate it. And I guess my point is, why are we wasting energy arguing with those people if they're not able to have that elevated intellectual discussion?
There's two reasons.
Not pat my own back. I'm capable of dealing with criticisms of my faith without taking it personally. I might be a little upset at some things, but I can take a breath and I can think about it objectively. A lot of people just cannot, and there's nothing you can do about that. So why waste your time engaging those people? Because
it's not about them. It's about those who are listening to the conversation. Because there's always somebody listening. Whether they're right there, whether they're a bystander, whether they're a viewer on YouTube, or whether there's someone going back and watching a video, sometimes days, weeks, months, years after the fact. Like, Matt Dillahunty debated Cy Ten Bergencape for the last time, like 3 or 4 years ago. I still go back and watch that from time to time. Not to reinforce anything about myself, but to learn more about debate tactics, learn more about how some people deal with presuppositionalism and things like that. Yeah. But that still has an impact on people. Because I'm not the only one that goes back and watches that. I can't be. I can't be responsible for the tens of thousands of views that one video has.
You're like, I see the view count going up.
Right.
And I know he doesn't have that many subscribers.
No, it's not even about that. It's I know that I have not watched it that many times.
Right.
So it's not about the person you're talking to. For me, it is about everyone else who is listening who may be on the fence one way or the other.
Here's the flaw with that. As an American, religion is a constitutional right, which means that if you are engaging with someone on a topic about their personal faith that they are not ready, willing, or able to intellectually discuss in a manner in which they will not be personally offended, it is no different than publicly berating any other person based on any other aspect of their identity. Their racial identity, sexual identity, any kind of identity, that you would be calling them out to make a point to the other people in the crowd. It would still be bullying.
It's not about that. I'm talking about two people who have voluntarily engaged to speak publicly on something.
I'm not sure that. I guess specifically Christopher Hitchens.
No, Christopher Hitchens,
Always
he was a debate hound. He was
Yeah.
a debate hound, he was a
always pick
roundtable
that
discussion
word.
hound, and he was fantastic at it. And he
Yeah.
did not pull any punches. He would call someone out for being a jackass and acknowledge that he, in fact, was a jackass at times. But that does not excuse people who volunteer to talk to someone publicly about something. It doesn't excuse them from that. It does not excuse them from being personally responsible for regulating their own butthurt based
I
on
guess
the criticism of an idea. You know, I mean, when you look at religion as a whole, and I'm saying specifically religion,
yeah.
it dumbs down critical thinking. It really does. When you take your average American churchgoer, most of them, I accept what their pastor tells them, and they don't look at that Bible, they don't look at that text at all. They might look at the passage as being discussed at that particular church service. They don't look past it.
To a degree, I would even say that comment is biblically accurate in terms of religion is, at least in Christianity, the Bible is written in such a way where it is expected that you are able to subside on milk when you're ready for milk and meat when you're ready for meat. It's written so that there is an inherent religious truth that you're able to understand even at a very minimal level of comprehension. And as you grow, that understanding is supposed to grow. You're not supposed to stagnate at the first level.
We have a, here's the problem is
critical.
There's a word for that. It's called indoctrination.
I mean, you could call it indoctrination.
No,
or you
that's
could
what
call
it is.
education.
No, that's
It's no
exactly what it
different
is.
than going to learn any other thing. You enter it at an entry level, learning a little bit. You learn basic addition and subtraction, and then eventually you'll build your way up to calculus. But that's not brainwashing you that you now understand calculus.
True, but Catholicism isn't calculus. Like when anyone makes a claim that a deity exists, okay, they're shouldering a burden of proof.
Okay.
Like that's unavoidable. You've made a claim, and so you should be ready to defend that claim. In fact, when you look at the wide world of apologists these days, especially in Christianity, they say that they are specifically called forth to defend their faith. They must be ready to do so at all times, and that all Christians should be ready to do this. The book itself, or at least that interpretation of it, clearly states you should be ready to deal with this.
Yes, I
And
agree
if you
with that.
and if you can't, that's your own fault. That is not my fault for challenging the idea. That is not anyone else's fault for challenging that idea. That is that individual's fault for choosing not to do that, choosing not to understand or accept the burdens that come along with adopting that.
So I can almost get onto the same page with you with two caveats.
Okay.
Caveat one is it needs to be consensual. If you're going to debate someone, you're
Right.
not
No,
gonna
I'm
pull
not.
punches,
I'm
you're
not
gonna-
saying
you're
walk.
gonna-
I'm not saying walk up and slap a Bible or at somebody's hand and say, "Hey, we're going to talk about how your religion is wrong today." No. I'm not
Would you
saying
say
that at all.
thump a Bible?
No, I would not. Religion does not make people smarter. Religion doesn't educate people. Not like you look at most homeschooling situations. Homeschooling doesn't do very well in the U.S. Most of it's faith-based. In fact, one of the biggest
Homeschooled.
Okay? So that's your problem?
That was a good one. I like that. I set you right up for that. Just tossed it up and you went.
Yeah. Baseball to the head. Anyways, the problem is they talk about being open-minded while being incredibly closed-minded the entire time. Because they refuse to believe anything beyond that their God exists and that their God tells them what to do. And that book, that Bible, tells them everything that they really need to know about life and how to go through and how to go about it. And if you take the Bible at face value, if you take it literally, as unfortunately more than one person on this planet does, because if there was only one person, they'd have stopped by now, then you would believe that bats are birds, that somehow a flood occurred that covered the entire planet. That is not physically possible, because if it did, there would be no life on this earth for us to have this discussion. You would believe that you can completely hinge all of the bad things that ever happen in this world on the crimes committed in lieu of entrapment of a man and his genetic clone.
Okay.
I mean, to take the Bible literally is to invite stupidity.
This is, after all these years, the first time I've ever heard Eve referred to as Adam's clone.
She's made from his rib. That's a clone.
Yeah. Huh.
You just now thought about that, didn't you?
I just never really thought of it as being a clone, because it was Eve and not Steve. So I figured if it was a clone, it would be the exact same.
She's made from the same genetic material. Just because she turned out a different sex than he did, that doesn't make it not a clone.
Can you have it? Like, could I clone myself and have it be a woman?
I don't know. I'm not sure that's a discussion we should be having on this channel.
And if it was a discussion that I wanted to have on this channel, then wouldn't that kind of make it a discussion I should be having?
No, it would not. That's a discussion you should probably have with either a geneticist or a psychiatrist. One of the two, whichever.
What about a priest?
I mean, they're not going to know which way from up to deal with this, so they'd be as useless as you are.
Did you say I'm useless?
In talking about that subject, yeah.
Oh, okay.
You don't know anything about genetics unless you've been hiding a closet PhD in biology that I don't know about.
I know substantially less than you.
Okay then. So that's the issue.
It's more than nothing, but it's less than you on it. Anyway.
Okay then.
The other thing, first, the argument should be consensual. Second, it's important that you understand what your mental weight class is, and you don't get in there as a heavyweight going against like a straw weight, because I don't think that's ever helpful.
No, because therein lies the rub. There's the second reason. If a person has an idea that is just so bad that they choose to cling on to it for dear life, then, like I said, the first reason is to be convincing and to expose the bad idea to other people around who are listening and may listen in the future. The second is to publicly embarrass your opponent in front of a large enough audience as you possibly can.
Okay, Ben Shapiro.
He's not wrong. On that particular note, Ben Shapiro actually got it right. because
I think we both like him, by the way.
I like some aspects of him. No, I don't agree with him on everything, obviously, but I do agree with him on the topic of debate. I really do.
I was gonna be like, you mean like the whole God thing? Y'all disagree on that?
We certainly disagree on that. But anyway, going back to the article itself before we get derailed even further. I'm going to skip ahead. They say that the new atheism has largely been replaced. Fair to say now, as Stephen Poole did earlier, the new atheism movement has ended. They talk about what killed it. According to New Atheist, to quote Christopher Hitchens, religion poisons everything. Nowadays, yes. Religion stifles growth. I mean, it stifles growth.
You say potatoes, I say avoid them.
But why would you avoid potatoes? Potatoes are delicious in virtually
Starches.
any form by which
I don't
they're
need 'em.
prepared. That's why you choose a different potato. Not every potato is loaded with starch.
Yams aren't potatoes. Anyway.
Gosh. Anyways. He says militant belief has faltered, he suggests, because it cannot adequately explain sin. Okay, no, it has nothing to do with sin. And here's the broken point from BreakPoint, is that sin doesn't have to be explained by atheism, by an atheist at all. You want to know why? See if you can guess why I, as an atheist, have no obligation to explain sin, Harry.
Probably because it is just as meaningless to you as thetans are.
Precisely.
I, on the other hand, would say that sin is a necessary villain, that it is required. That's the same as necessary. But sin plays a role in allowing us to displace our hatred and emotions into something almost tangible. It's cathartic.
Yeah, it's a psychological scapegoat.
You know, scapegoat literally comes from sacrificing a lamb.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah,
I don't even know if it's psychological at this point. It's a question of whether it's literal or symbolic and what level you're dealing with. But yes, that's what it is.
You are creating a psychological scapegoat. But the problem is that's an unhealthy coping mechanism when you look at it from a psychological standpoint. To divorce yourself from the bad things that go on in your head doesn't make them go away. It doesn't actually help. It doesn't actually help you deal with them.
Okay.
It gives you the scapegoat. It gives you the excuse to say, that's not really me, that's my sin. And I can blame that on a couple of people from thousands of years ago who ate from the wrong tree. It's not really my fault. It is an escape from responsibility.
That's really more of a specific interpretation of original sin, whereas the Old Testament would be more of a covenant theology, where it wasn't necessarily a continuation. Yes, that original sin does affect and taint all of humanity, but the responsibility lies within the community, where there is a lack of faithfulness to God causes bad things to happen. So if you're looking at the Bible, that doctrine doesn't really explain the behaviors in the time of the Old Testament of God's wrath upon his people.
Again, it's a method of divorcing oneself from the responsibility of what you do, of the harm you cause either to yourself or somebody else.
which is where the New Testament comes in and creates a new covenant.
Except that doesn't erase sin, apparently.
It doesn't, but it explains that the impulse for sin is something that you are struggling against, and the forgiveness is already there. It's something that you need to learn to deal with. It's a progressive revelation that leads to more individual responsibility for the behavior.
No, it actually doesn't lead to more individual responsibility for the behavior. In fact, it's still effectively just a divine get-out-of-jail-free card. I mean, think of it this way. When you want to talk about, like, heaven and hell and things like that, okay? The only thing that really guarantees that you go to hell is to not believe.
Okay.
So that means that a serial killer, like, say, Jeffrey Dahmer, like to kill people, eat people, keep heads in his fridge, real wholesome all-American activities. But say on his deathbed, he honestly and fully believes and claims to repent from his sin, repent from the crimes that he committed, from the heinous acts that he did, scot-free. He dies, he goes to heaven. Period. End of story. But say someone like Christopher Hitchens didn't hurt anybody, didn't kill anybody, certainly didn't eat them, dies and goes to hell, all because he just didn't believe. It's a it's an imaginary get out of jail free card to separate oneself from the responsibility of one's own deeds.
So, if Christianity is true,
mm-hmm.
then there is an explanation for why forgiveness is showing different in those two situations, where they're both where one is being forgiven and one is not, based purely upon faith in God. The
mm-hmm.
sin that Hitchens would have been committing would have been one of pride or arrogance, of saying that there is no God and not accepting that. Now, on the other hand, so Christians have an explanation for that.
Yes, it's not a good one. I understand the explanation for it.
Right.
I understand the...
If there is no God, Christianity is false. Why would it matter between the two of them? What do you base the idea of justice or equity upon? Why was that unfair?
Oh, if they both die and go nowhere and none of it's true, then there's nothing really innately wrong with that. Aside from the fact that the religion is being used, or the belief in religion or belief in a God is being used as a scapegoat, as a method of divorcing oneself from the responsibility of one's actions.
Okay, so
much like the honor killing of that 13-year-old girl, the very first story we talked about. That sperm-donating shitbag is using his religion to divorce himself from the responsibility of the fact that he murdered his child.
To be honest, we don't even know that. We know that that the government has a law that is an interpretation of the religion that he's using to avoid the justice system. He's avoiding going to court and getting an earthly punishment. We don't know if there's any religious or moral justification that is being invoked here.
Okay.
We just know what he's getting away with in terms of the justice system.
Then forget this particular honor killing and look at literally any other honor killing. The fact remains. The argument still stands.
Okay.
In that is a person's or group of people's imaginary justification for murdering somebody. For no crime. the woman committed no crime other than the fact that she was taken advantage of and had a crime committed against her. But, you know, we're going to drag her out in the town, put her in a pit, and throw rocks at her head. Again, it is an attempt at a moral justification for terrible deeds, and just for all around being a shitty person.
So
it's like Catholics excusing themselves through the absolution of confession.
I definitely get the logical argument of what you're describing.
Mm-hmm.
But how I understand the Bible to be that someone who is doing that is completely illegitimate in their faith and does not understand. They have, first of all, no self-awareness of their own behavior or their own ideas. They're just lying to themselves to create justification for whatever they want. And that's
now you're assuming that you know what the person's thinking. I mean, that's something on a whole nother level there. I'm talking about a person who honestly believes that they have made this repentant confession or whatever.
Okay.
They honestly believe they've done it. In fact, I think...
Then go forth and sin no more.
What's
then,
that?
If it's an honest confession, then go forth and sin no more.
Well, I mean, it's
like
kind of hard.
I
mean, it's kind of hard to, keep sinning when it's right before they stick a needle full of sodium pentothal into your arm.
But if it's legitimate, why does it matter? Like, what does it matter if it's a legitimate? If it's a legitimate confession and they do mean it and they really see the error of their ways and they are fully repentant and they avoid hell and go to heaven,
but that doesn't.
Why does it matter?
Because that still doesn't address the underlying issue of dealing with the thoughts they have in their head. They're just trying to cram it into a little box so they don't have to deal with it anymore. And so someone like Jeffrey Dahmer, Jeffrey Dahmer is an extreme example. I'm talking about virtually any religious person who uses sin as a scapegoat, which is a lot of them, who blame everything bad in their life as being either the result of bad luck or even going so far as to blaming it on the devil. They blame every bad thing that ever happened to them in their life. Oh, that was the work of the devil. The devil made me do it. That kind of thing.
So, like Haggard is a good example there.
Sure.
Yes, I was caught with meth and a prostitute. But
yeah, Ted Haggard. Yeah. Yeah. And he still I can't remember if he's even come to the grips with the fact that he's gay.
Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, so again, that is someone going back into a religion, going back into an extreme degree of indoctrination to avoid dealing with the problem. And we see this happen time and again. Religion is just a scapegoat for a lot of people. It is a psychological escape, is what it is. And it doesn't actually deal with any underlying issues.
So it looks like our two perspectives are yours. It's an unhealthy way of
coping,
othering these feelings and distancing yourself from accountability for your actions. And then my way of looking at it is this is a tool with which one uses to better understand what redemption and changing is without having to lug around that depression and guilt forever. It gives someone an opportunity to escape the cycle.
I'll hit you with well, the thing is, if you, by all accounts, honestly deal with the issue, acknowledge the fact that you are responsible for what happened, of whatever it is, and then you honestly take steps to either correct the injustice you visited upon someone else, or to make yourself a better person, realizing that you have done bad things, and use that as fuel to be a better version of you, to try and get to the best version of you. Those are changes that tend to last quite a bit longer. You see this with 12-step programs. There are more instances of relapse with 12-step programs than any other form of addiction rehabilitation. Because in large part, 12-step programs are religiously focused, and the individual undergoing it is simply trading one addiction for another. They're trading in meth for Jesus. And a lot more often than not, they end up going back to meth. But those that get into drug rehab programs that focus on them as a person, not just their chemical addiction and not just whatever their faith is, and they actually get the person to honestly introspect, to honestly completely self-reevaluate, they have much higher rates of success and higher rates of continued success. And so that's another reason why I will go back to saying religion is just it's a primitive coping mechanism that doesn't really work. And it's something that, because it is no longer useful, it should indeed go the way of the dodo eventually.
I would say that it can be primitive for people who are primitive. And I think that a matured, appropriate outlook of Christianity should resemble what you're discussing with the successful programs that focus on actually understanding what your motivations are, taking a self-aware look at yourself, that's the direction things should be going. For me, Christianity has not outlived its usefulness. There's still developments and understandings that I am able to use and apply. And I, in my current faith, don't see that it would ever end, because that is my quote unquote path. It's weird to use the word, your path that you chose, but that's the only way I could use in our conversation to really describe it.
That's fine. Whatever helps you get the idea out of your head.
Yeah. I think that when people use things as an excuse, like you're saying, as a way of deflecting from taking responsibility, it's not healthy. And as a religious person, I'm not comfortable with them using my religion as their coping mechanism if they aren't making genuine changes. If someone this feels weird to say, but if someone has an impairment, they have an issue where upper level psychological self-analysis is not going to be available, and they can at least find truth within religion that will give them peace and direction. I think that is something that Christianity is able to offer those.
Well, that may be something for us to discuss at another point in time, just because I don't think either of us are really studied up on that particular aspect of it. So to avoid foot and mouth syndrome for either of us, I think we'll move on from that one.
Okay.
In another autopsy of the new atheism at Arc Digital, Ben Sixsmith suggests that those once preoccupied with arguing against the existence of God have moved on to more intense areas of rhetorical dispute like racial and gender oppression, while those who bang on about atheism now look, in his words, increasingly monomaniacal, irrelevant, and dull. Okay, I can see where that guy is kind of coming from on that one. I agree that there are other issues that go on in our world today that plague us, but at its root, some of that is very possibly religiously intertwined. And so I think that in some way you really have to address both to actually address the entire issue.
Yeah,
That's why I do this that's why I do this channel, because
yeah.
to me, a person's, like, they talk about racial and gender repression, so that's going to get more into the political side of things, and I'm going to try to avoid that. But when you look at that as a whole, a person's religion informs their politics in a lot of ways. We see that a lot, especially with conservatism. A lot of conservatives, excuse me, inform their political opinion based on their religious beliefs in some shape, way, or form. And so, if there is a problem with a conservative outlook on something, on a particular issue, then at some point, religion most likely will rear its head. And I think that that also has to be addressed as well. Because if that's the root cause for a person making a decision or developing a particular opinion about public policy, then you can't accurately address their policy opinion without addressing the root cause of the opinion itself. At least that's my particular take on it.
I think that's fair. I'm conservative, and I think that's a pretty fair assessment. I'd say that I would agree a little bit stronger than you with his assessment, because when I look at pop culture, I see, you know, the new age, almost neo-pagan, in the 70s and 80s, the satanic panic of the 80s and 90s. I can see where religion was very fundamental to public discourse and discussion, especially with no internet. People had to speak on a collective knowledge that they all shared, and religion was that. People usually knew something about the Bible within, society, so they could have an opinion on it and discuss. Memes weren't really a thing then. And now that we're into the free information that goes back and forth, a lot more people have become more aware of gender identity and, homosexuality and different identities and orientations. And so that does appear to have more of the discussions where there's more conflict and more emotional reaction.
Right,
Yeah.
there's definitely more conflict and more emotional reaction in those two particular arenas of discussion, especially nowadays. And to those, when it comes to racial oppression and things like that, I don't see there being a big religious component to that. Now, there are some people who may, for whom a religious component may very well be a big deal in that particular arena of politics. But at large, no, not really. For lack of a better term, other forms of identity politics, such as gender expression, sexual orientation, things like that, a lot of that does ultimately end up in some form of religious discussion or other. Like, for instance, when before the statement was made by the Supreme Court that same-sex marriage was very much indeed protected under the First Amendment, that was one of the biggest things right there. There was this religious pushback on same-sex marriages. That was the largest community pushing back against that. And so that's why, and that's recent. That's as recent as just five years ago or less. And so I still think that religion is still going to be a large component going forward, especially when just under 70% now of the U.S. population is Christian on its own, just under 70%, and upwards of 90% are religious in some form or other. And as the population grows, as information gets passed around from one source to the next, to the next, to the next, I think it's still going to remain important for many years to come until religion either just somehow goes away entirely or it literally takes over everything and quashes every other opinion.
And we're both holding out for different outcomes on that.
Probably so. No, I don't know. Because when you look at things from that perspective, a theocracy is inherently anti-freedom.
Yeah, I'm not really looking forward to that.
So I think given the choice between the two, knowing your political persuasion, I honestly think that you would side with me and that you would rather see religion go away entirely than see it take over.
No, I would rather see... If
those are the only two options you have.
And I would rather see religion take over as long as it was the one true King of Kings. And it was like no more earthly kingdoms. I'd be okay with that.
That's not what we're talking about. You're trying to insert caveats to oppose what I'm saying to try and change the meaning of what I said.
Okay, so if it was a premature theocracy, I would not be okay with that.
I would say that there's never going to be a mature theocracy.
I just don't see how religion would completely 100% go away. We see so many new off-the-wall religions that pop up all the time. There's always going to be some religion.
But the majority of them, as quickly as they are born, they die just as fast. The only ones that ultimately stick around end up being the big ones. We've got Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Hinduism, and a few others that have stuck around for thousands of years.
Yeah.
And that's why. It's, when you look at it from a political perspective, the big religions, the ones that have been around, those have incumbency power. Because when you look at the history of voting in this country, especially over the last 30 years or so, incumbents win 90% of the time or more, because incumbency has a power all on its own. And I see, to some extent, the exact same phenomenon occur with religion. A new religion pops up, it goes away pretty quick. But one that's been around forever, like Joe Biden or the Bushes, the Clintons, anything like that, they have a large amount of staying power because people know who they are and because they stayed around for a long time. They got in once and they stayed for a long time. But anyways, we pretty much addressed all the comments as they came through. And some of them we actually really didn't even mean to. And in that we hadn't read them yet, and it pretty much came through. Okay, so Atheist Roundtable agree with me, saying religion makes us dumber.
I ain't no more stupider than you.
Proving my point. Mom jumped in and said that it was absolutely true about the homeschool curriculum. So, sucks to be you, Harry.
I take exception to that. I resemble that remark.
All right there, Foghorn Leghorn. You're nowhere near as suave, and you never will be. And then Mom talks about deathbed confessions, religion as a crutch. Yeah, so, okay. I would say we addressed all the comments kind of as they came in without even really meaning to, or directly intending to, anyways. So, with all that being said, I guess it's time to send people off to enjoy the rest of their Sunday evening. Quick announcement to make: there will be a discussion with Atheist happening this Friday at around 5 p.m. Central Time. I do have to work that day, so might be a couple of minutes late. So just be prepared for that. Sorry in advance. And I'll be discussing presuppositionalism and the transcendental argument for the existence of God with Chris from the YouTube channel Dualos Theology. So be sure to tune into that and catch the discussion. It should be about an hour long, and of course, put any comments or questions you have in the chat as the show goes on, and we will get to as many of them as we possibly can. Other than that, I look forward to seeing y'all next week at 6 p.m. on Sunday. Y'all have a good evening. Oh, wait, no. I have one more thing before we go away. The Atheist Reformation public service announcement for the week. Eliminate bad ideas. Vaccinate with critical thinking.
I can ship.
There you go. All right, so now everybody have a good evening. Y'all have fun.